Simeon Ehui has lived in many parts of the world. We were privileged to have him launch our Agric Transformation Report in Washington. He's lived in Nigeria, Ethiopia, Pakistan, Washington, and now that he's in Ghana, we'll keep him here for a few years, hopefully. And he's the Director of Agricultural Group Practice for the World Bank, and he's graciously agreed to chair this panel. So without wasting any more time, I want us to give him a round of applause as he sets the scene for us and leads us. Please put your hands together for Simeon Ehui.
Good morning. Thank you, Bernard. I'm really pleased to be here today and honored to chair this session that focuses on agriculture. I cannot pass this opportunity to thank also KY for his leadership and determination to establish assets, and to do think, and the focus that he has put on agriculture last year with the ATR2. The ATR2 and the breakout sessions of yesterday made it very clear. Agriculture is critical to Africa's biggest development goals, and we cannot say it enough. Agriculture is a major engine of growth and job creation. We are pleased to know that Ghana has made agriculture a major priority area for economic growth and youth employment, as noted earlier by Vice President Bawumia and also the Minister of Finance, Ken Atta. Now, we all know that farming accounts for 60% of employment in sub-Saharan Africa. Food systems jobs account for even more. For example, in Ethiopia, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zambia, the food system is projected to add more jobs than the rest of the economy between 2010 and 2025. And by the way, do you know which sector or the industry which is the largest employer in a country like France? You may think it's Airbus. It is not. It is the food industry. So indeed, like other countries, agricultural transformation can power economic transformation. But agriculture sector in Africa is facing serious challenges. Productivity in Africa lags behind other regions. Currently, 1 in 4 people in sub-Saharan Africa are chronically undernourished. In the coming decades, Africa's food system will be further strained by a population that is projected to rise to 1.3 billion people by 2050. The food security challenge will only grow as climate change intensifies, threatening crop and livestock production. This means that if no adaptation occurs, production of maize, for example, which is one of Africa's staple crops, could decline by up to 40% by 2050. So the main question before us are as follows. What would it take to transform African agriculture in terms of policies, technologies, and systems? Second question, which areas should policymakers, governments, and entrepreneurs focus on to facilitate agriculture-led economic transformation in Africa? The ATR2, the African Transformation Report 2, speaks of 2 tracks. One through manufacturing, and the other track through modernizing agriculture. And the report elaborated much more on the second track, which is right, and we agree with that. Yesterday, also, we benefited from the experience of key stakeholders. Ghana, represented by my friend, the Minister of Agriculture, Owusu Akoto, Uganda Minister of Agriculture, Christopher Kibazanga, some representatives from Kenya, the Gambia, as well as representatives from developer partners like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, private sectors, NGO, MCC, and AGRA. I will not go into details of that since Minister Christopher Kibazanga will give the summary of the day one sessions later at the end of this particular session. All I can say now is that there is convergence on the what's, but less so on the hows. And this is where I believe critical partnership between or among the stakeholders will be very important. In today's plenary, we will hear from three distinguished panelists. Julius Gatune, who is a senior research and policy advisor of ASSET. Then we hear from Fadel Indiame, who is the regional head for West Africa in AGRA. And last, from Nick Thompson, who is the executive director, governance at the Tony Blair Institute. Let me say this without apology. Our discussions of today will need to be guided by some degree of urgency, given the challenges that the continent faces. So without further ado, let me call on the panelists to come on this floor. Thank you. We'll start with Julius, who will give us a quick presentation on the ATR2, which was completed late last year. And then I'll invite Agra to make a few statements before going to Nick Thompson.
I'm going to talk about, give a brief summary of the Agricultural Transformation Report that we recently launched last year, but also we also did a formal launch again 2 months ago. But this is really going to be a summary because it's quite a heavy report, quite a bit of detail. So I'm going to go quite quickly through it. So I go. So in terms of agriculture, how do we see agriculture in Africa for us? It's about ensuring food security on one hand, and it's also about giving people a proper middle-class lifestyle, really, not about subsistence. How do we make agriculture provide the kind of lifestyle that people want rather than subsistence? And also, the other thing is really about how does it drive transformation, because that's really the key about this report. How do you use agriculture as a driver of economic transformation? And therefore, there are two processes here. First of all, it's about boosting a production, which is key, first of all. And then the other thing is really about how do you then link it? How do you upgrade the value chains? And how do you create linkages to the other sectors of the industry? So then agriculture becomes the key employer. As we have just been told, France, the biggest employer is food system. It's really not agriculture itself. It's probably the whole upgraded value chain. So you need to have everything working, then you can create employment. And also, but it's really about products. It's really about addressing markets. And I'll come back to that later. Agriculture is still important for all countries. We know that GDP of agriculture tracks very well the economic GDP. Maybe the strength is not as there as it was before, but it's still very strong. Still an important employer for many countries. Sometimes some places is about 70%. But also we know that exports have not been doing well. Actually, you know, Africa has been losing competitiveness. And one interesting example is Vietnam, I think, is the second biggest exporter of coffee, but they got most of their technology from Kenya. And I think palm oil also, the technologies came from Ghana and Nigeria. So we have kind of been losing productivity, losing competitiveness, not as productive as we should be. So the key thing is that when agriculture grows, the economy grows. So agriculture can really be the locomotive for the economy. And therefore, the opportunities What about, where are these? We know Africa has 60% of the remaining arable land. And we know population is growing. 2050, people will be 9 billion. Where do you feed them? Africa is an opportunity. And obviously you have seen people come and for these some people call them land grabs. But they have interest in investing in agriculture in Africa because there is the land. There's also sunshine all the year round, so you can do more than one crop. You can do several crops. But this also means you need water. So that is key. And also, we have also expanding markets. Imports are growing. That's actually a testimony that it's a good market here. But it's because there's growing middle class, we also have urbanization. All these are driving markets, and African markets are changing. And in most countries, a recent study showed 50% of food markets are now in urban areas. In almost all countries, 50% is in urban areas. They are very dynamic markets. Also, we have a youthful population. Source of dynamism in terms of productivity, in terms of many things. But as we will see later, they are not really farming. And we want to think, why are they not farming? Or why should they be farming? But the challenges, yes, access to land is a challenge. You need land. It's not like because we don't have to land. We have land, yes, but access to it, there are issues. The issues of titling, the issues of infrastructure to get that land. So when we talk of 60% of land, where is it? It might not be accessible. And therefore, that's why you also need investment. The other challenge is farming is not seen as profitable. Low farm productivity is actually related to that. And people don't make money, some people, subsistence. And for you to make money from farming, you really need to be able to specialize and be able to address markets. But if you have subsistence, you are not really addressing markets because you are, first of all, addressing your food needs, and maybe that's not what the market needs. And I think when we were looking at cassava here in Ghana, people say they want cassava that makes fufu. Ankara is the best breed they want. But really when the breweries which are demanding cassava, they want cassava high in starch. So there's really a disconnect. High in starch, nobody wants it for food. So unless you start specializing, then you become commercialized. And I'll come back to that later because that's an issue. And then also the issue of aging farmers. Farmers are aging, that we know. Youth don't want to farm. How do you tap that dynamism in the youth? By making them go to farming. So those are key challenges of farming. And therefore, it was mentioned really about industrialization. Africa is about low-cost manufacturing. We can go about that route, which was Asia did, but that's a export-oriented, high labor-intensive manufacturing. It's a challenge. Why? With fourth industrial revolution, we know we have had problems. And I think the one interesting report that was given is Africa is going to have problems because of automation, and also you're seeing reshoring, you're also seeing Asia fighting to keep those industries there because they're automating and they're putting robots. So as for Africa, really what you have is the second track. It's really about using agro-processing as a base for industrialization. And what this is about really modernizing farming. You have to modernize your farm so that you can upgrade these value chains. And once you upgrade value chains, there are many things out there. Logistics, storage, processing, retailing, marketing, all kinds of interesting things happen up there. But that can only be supported by what you call an upgraded value chain. Then you have agro-processing, which is the key, driving the industrialization. And from there, you also input, you can also do machinery for inputs, fertilizers, and other things. So the opportunities a lot along the value chain for industrialization. And when we think of agriculture, we say it really should be driving transformation. But what is this about? It's about boosting yields first. Because without boosting yields, you can't have the low-cost raw material that is needed to drive transformation. And also you need food to be cheap because people are poor in Africa. Some places, 70% of the budget of household, especially in urban poor communities, is spent on food. So really, if you can lower the cost of food by boosting yields, it means people can have more money in their pocket. And also you can keep wages low so that you can also stimulate other sectors of the economy. And more importantly also, you can also have, I guess, we also said about inputs, those are potential for employment. And also boosting what you call agro-processing, I have mentioned that. And then the key thing is that as you grow agro-processing, then you can start reducing the food imports. And once you reduce food imports, you can have more physical space. You can have less, that money could be used to import capital and other things. And also the key thing is also about increasing farm incomes, income of farmers. Because once you have more money in the pocket, you increase demand. aggregate demand raises, and people demand other things in the sector. So therefore, agriculture becomes a way of putting more money in pockets and also creating more aggregate demand. So that is, and also taxes, and therefore, you get all this economic going together, everything working out nicely, and you have this locomotive driving the economy. But we say there are challenges, and land, we say that is a big, big problem. Big problem in Africa, most land is not titled, but also the challenge is not only titled. Some places, for example, I think we got a presentation from Kenya yesterday on Kirinyaga, where 84% of land is titled. So they don't have a problem of titling, but the problem they have is the land being fragmented. As families divide land, you're having 0.6 hectares going to 0.2, going to that. So that's going to be a challenge. And also, the other thing is about how to access that. How do you give access to that land? I mentioned about infrastructure is important. But also, the other thing is about also the rights. Because we want people to come and invest. You want investors to come and invest in this 60% unused land. But how do you make sure that this investment in land does not dispossess people? So you really need to think about land. How to get people land, how to get titling. And this is all about doing many things. Apart from doing legislation, you also need to start thinking about technology. And I think one good example, the Minister of Uganda is here. Uganda have done very good. They have introduced a land information system. And from that, they have been able to cut by 10% from 227 days to 27 days in terms of land registration. Mortgages origination from 55 days. And has also had good benefits because incomes have gone up for government because government makes money from all these transactions. By 10%, by 10 times, actually, 10 times. So really, there is a case for making land easily accessible, and also government can also do well. So, and there are also all kinds of examples. Traditional communities, you need to think how to engage better with them, how to move to local governance. And I think Botswana has done a good case of that. Land rental markets make them work better. Ethiopia is doing a good job of that. So all these there are all kinds of issues, and they are detailed in our reports. Innovations, because really it's about how do you go about, each country is different. So the innovations are up there, and I would encourage you to look at the report. And therefore, about boosting productivity, this is, I've mentioned, is key to driving agro-processing, to driving industry and so on. So I'll not dwell on that. The key thing is that how do you boost productivity? It's really about doing a green revolution. We have had green revolution in Asia, but Africa Green Revolution never happened, and it's going to be different. And Agra people are here, really, that is their mission, and they talk about it. We have different agroecological conditions. You really have to think very differently, because you have to think of various staples, not just going to be about maize or about rice or about what. You have to think of a number of crops. And I think in our report, we have detailed a number of staples that are key to feeding Africa and looking at them. So that is very, very important. And also farmer training, really. Extension, yes, it's important, but also key that we find in our report, and I think we see good examples from JICA, where they have gone and created farmer field schools, and farmer trained farmers. And yields have been able in rice, I think in Tanzania, even in Uganda, even in Ghana, they have been able to get yields close to what you see in Asia. And this, even farmers who are not trained and never got to contact with other farmers, knowledge has diffused. So you find that knowledge can be very, very, very key. So how you think about knowledge is extension, there are many ways, and also farmer training. Farmer-to-farmer training is important. Obviously, irrigation is important. We talked about water, but Africa, irrigation is really 4% only of the potential is utilized. You can do much more with irrigation. And therefore, you need to tailor packages, and I will come back to that. How do you tailor a green revolution package to farmers, and especially to women farmers who are most of the farmers? How do you think, you have to have a package that is a number of things to going together. I'll bring that later. And it's about machines also. Much as we say green revolution, we have to be careful that machines are important in Africa. It's not that there's a lot of labor, and these are examples that we have seen. If you look at Ghana, if you don't have machinery, cassava becomes very difficult. And we find that we found some people, even when they farm cassava, they let it stay on the ground because they don't have the labor to get it out. And they would tell you, if you want to buy the cassava, go to the field, it's there. Pay me money, find your ways to harvest it. Machineries are important. And therefore, if you look at India, we have about 120 tractors per 100 hectares. Africa, on average, is 10. So India is actually 10 times more in machinery. So machineries are important, but how do you also get machinery availed to the farmers. And again, it is about business models, farmer to farmer, and we'll come back to that. Farmer to farmer hiring is important, and that's where middle-class farmers become important. And we have seen this in Ghana and other places, where middle-class farmers, medium-scale farmers, don't have to use all the capacity. 50% of their capacity they lend to other farmers. In Uganda, we saw a farmer-based organization that provides machinery for farmers, and they are doing sorghum for the breweries. And they were able to give simple machineries through hiring services. Another model which is very, very important is really energizing what you call the local fabrication sectors. How do you make people can make machineries, and cassava has also been very successful in creating machineries made by these local roadside manufacturers that you see. First of all, they create something simple, but over time, if you think of cassava, they started with perforated metal and something you grate, then they have gone ahead and they have put machinery, they have put motors into those things, and now they have, basically, if you look at the machine, how it has progressed, you can see very, very good progress. And a good example is Thailand, where they created what you call iron buffalo, which basically they have gone ahead and converted what you'd call the plow pulled by a cow, and they put an engine first there, then they have put other things as time has gone along. And now it has become called the iron buffalo. But this was really started from small fabrication, moving up. And therefore, when we are talking of two-wheel tractors, yes, you can import two-wheel tractors, but also you can incentivize local fabricators to start fabricating those kind of things. Really, machinery becomes key. And therefore, commercializing is another thing. You have to commercialize agriculture. It's about markets, really. It's about reducing risk. I think yesterday somebody said farmers are risk-averse, but they also make economic sense. They are not just farmers, if you can't address risk, they're not going to invest. And therefore, you have to think of risk-addressing mechanisms. Sometimes it's just information, and I think some experiments have shown if you give farmers and also demonstrating, people start adopting newer technologies. Also, it's also about risk. There are tools now, index insurance, rainfall insurance, and those kind of things. So all those things become very, very important in terms of, and also output markets. Output markets are also important in terms of, if you don't have good output markets, how am I going to specialize in growing a cassava that is required by the brewery, which is high in starch, but I also want to buy mine, which is for food. I have to have markets work. So farmers cannot specialize unless they are sure that markets are going to work properly. So that's key. It's a key risk. And also input markets are important because a lot of fake products, we have found that it's a big challenge. People don't trust inputs. You don't know where. And I think in Kenya right now, there's a big case where fertilizer has, I think, sand, stones, or other things. You have to have input markets work. And also, these again also interesting innovations. And I think this is one of we are recording in our cases, where somebody had decided to brand all these small agrovettes, because you have 10,000 agrovettes. How do you ensure they can sell quality? One way is franchising and branding. And I think one person has come to take all under one umbrella, trained, and also, since we have uniform, they have branding and so on, you can easily police, because it's hard for police, for the regulatory authority to police so many small vendors. So it's key to think all these interesting innovations to address these challenges. And therefore, Feeding Africa, I had mentioned about that. We import a lot. We worked on 5 staples, and we looked at how to improve productivity, how to make markets work better. So all these things are important. So reducing post-harvest losses is key, because you have already had that food. And they're also interesting innovation. Hermetic bags, I think Agra has done a good job in introducing some of these simple technologies, very cheap. You also have traditional technologies that actually can work very well. Some mud silos actually have been shown they can work for 50 years and they work very well and if they're done properly. So you can have technologies to do that. Also, you need to also improve packaging and so on. I think yesterday we showed a very interesting picture in Tanzania where they showed somebody had cut fruit packaging and so on. Again, this is all about markets, really making markets work, and about branding. And one thing, as I said, we did an interesting case is, how do you start people to start taking sorghum and millet? Because really, the food for Africa, which they have eaten for a long time, was sorghum and millet. But they have fallen off. Rice, wheat, maize are coming. Why are people eating wheat? At the same time, if you go to most households, like in West Africa, really, people don't even use wheat or wheat flour in their house. But they do wheat products. They will eat bread, they will eat other things. So it's really about product development and branding and image. And that's what we were trying to do in Uganda, I think, with Numa Foods there. We worked about how to show people that these foods can also be modern. So we worked out with top chefs, we created 100 recipes that had nothing to do with the traditional way that we eat sorghum and millet, which is basically what you call porridge or ugali or kalo in Uganda. And therefore, that shows the image is also important, and branding. So that is also part of the equation, so that you address this idea of diets are shifting. You shift diets back. Powering industry, again, this I've mentioned, I'm not going to go through this much, but it's really about having the yields that are high enough so that you can power up processing. And it's not about just yields, it's about quality also. Because quality, if you're going to do a processing, you need consistent in supply, consistency in quality, and also low price. So you really to have low, high yields, and also machine to make sure that you have the right quality, and also consistency. So all these things become important. And when you think of agriculture, really, it's going to power economy. And if it's going to be powering economy, then it's important that the macro environment is right, the private sector development is done right, because really agriculture is the biggest private sector in Africa, and you have seen that. And also, quite important is that you can have agricultural policy, but an industrial and trade policy are also part of the agriculture. So when you talk of this value chain, really you have to have those coordinated. So that is key. The other thing is also we need to treat this as two sides of the same coin, and also finance has to be there. So really we have to find a way to bring all these players together. I think this, and therefore in terms of jobs, this I've mentioned, I'm not going to go much about this. There are jobs in, agriculture can create many jobs, we were told. The biggest employer is the food system. It's really about the food system. It's about inputs, it's about jobs in logistics, about irrigation, supplies, services. And I'll come to services. Services is actually the most interesting. I'll go to the next slide, really. It's about also having what you call the missing middle, because in Africa we have smallholders, farmers who are a lot, and a few large-scale farmers. But what we don't have is the key glue that ties the whole system, the whole ecosystem. We are called the medium-scale farmers. And these are interesting people because I have given the example where they can also provide machinery. Also important is they also help bring technology from the frontier. For example, if you think of Kenya where the dairy industry is developing, people are now no longer, the smallholder farmers are no longer trying to breed cattle. All they do is that if the cow gives birth, they can give away the calf and just focus on milk. The medium-scale farmers are about bringing up the cattle for milk. And the people at the high end, the large scale, are more about breeding. So you are creating an interesting ecosystem where all these are working together. So it comes, that is a key glue of making the whole system work. And this is where you can bring in young people, young educated people, because you can support them so that they become this missing middle, where they can provide services, they can be farmers, and key services. Because farmers, young people don't have to be farmers, they can be service providers. And one example I always give is in Nigeria where they had all these people who they put in uniform, they gave them knapsacks, they gave them sprayers, and they could go killing weeds, and they were weed killer cops. And they go around killing weeds, and that provides services, and there are all kinds of services you can provide. So again, bringing youth, you have to really think how to bring them in. And the place to bring them in is make them the middle class, medium scale farmers who become the glue in the whole system and start providing services, doing contracting, providing all kinds of services and so on. Yeah, just as I close up, I want to also put one important thing. Upgrading is not gender neutral. As you try to upgrade farming, some people can lose out. And one interesting example I always give is Gari was started by women in Ghana, Nigeria, and so on and so on. But over time, as that market has grown, that value chain has been taken by SMEs, by male-owned dominated farms. Also the same thing, as that industry has grown, you needed machineries. Machineries, if you look at where they process, they always have to have men working in those processing factories because the machinery are not gender-friendly. So you have to really think, how do you give gender balance? We know land we have mentioned. How do you make land accessible to farmers? Many traditions don't allow that. But there are also interesting things that we have seen. I think in one case I saw in Nigeria is where fathers were inheriting their children, their girl children, before they died. And that made them have secure rights even after, rather than leaving it to the tradition. So there are interesting things that you can do. Yeah, also laws, obviously, laws have been changed. You can do legal. You can also engage. I think I saw in Senegal, women were able to engage the traditional leaders and also be able to start securing land rights. So these things are important. Financial inclusion. We have now technologies. We are being able to to get access to finance, because that is key. Also, the other thing is also interesting packages. You have to provide a package that a woman can be able to, because women have a lot of burden, so you cannot just, you have to package materials, package fertilizers, package things, in things that they can be able to carry as they go to through the other business. And I saw this interesting case where the Donata, they were doing cassava, and they were giving them in certain packages, they were giving them some sprouted to save labor, because really you have to think, how do you save labor so that their labor can be, their labor is demanded by many other tasks, so that is key. And the other thing which is really important is also sustainability. You cannot just go about farming without understanding it's going to harm environment, and in this area of climate change. So you have to think about more use of organic, also how to do conservation farming. That's the other thing. So really, I don't want to go into that, but conservation farming, also irrigation. We know water logging can be a challenge. So you have to think, how do you do irrigation in an interesting way to save water, and also to avoid siltation. So really, that is my presentation. But really, there's an opportunity out here. We need partnerships, and this is why we have started that, really, and this is where I...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julius. Thank you. Yeah. We know that I mean, you have a lot to say about it and excited about it. And I'm sure that the audience here you'll have opportunity to respond to some of the questions from the audience and expand on some of the areas. But we are particularly proud of this particular report. Now, our next speaker will be Fadel from AGRA. And in your talk, what I would like you to focus on is how, as the Alliance of Green Revolution, working on a number of countries, 11 countries I think I understand, you would be able to partner with assets to move forward in implementation of some of the recommendations of this particular report in practical terms.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair. I have to thank Julius for a brilliant presentation and very comprehensive. Firstly, to say that the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa is an alliance. It's a broad platform that was set up exactly 10 years ago under the leadership of Kofi Annan, who was then General Secretary of the United Nations, with a basic question in mind. How come the Green Revolution succeeded everywhere except in Africa? Therefore, the challenge was to come up with a uniquely African of triggering an agricultural transformation. And AGRA has been at the forefront of this work in partnership with others. So I'm very happy to deal with this. I think key to this is firstly sharing the promises of agriculture. I think it has been very well articulated by Julius, and I think the narrative that our colleagues from ASSET are providing is probably one of what we share the most. Agriculture can be at the heart of our transformation. But to take advantage of this benefit, we need to understand the specific challenge of agriculture in Africa. One of the key characteristics of Africa is it's huge and very diverse. The immediate implication is you don't have a blueprint. You can copy and paste. So the requirement to get it right in Africa is an ability to understand the local setting, the local context, and to work with institutions. Build the institution to help deliver a unique answer to a global challenge. You may want to produce food, but you don't produce it the same way everywhere because the context is different. Now, this simple premise has driven the work that we have done over the last 10 years, working with government, farmers, private sector, and some of our partners who are in this room, to build institutions, support research, to come up with specific varieties that have the genetic potential of improving what our farmers are already doing, bring on board the private sector who is able to take up the improved seed and put it at the doorstep of the farmers. But none of this is possible if you don't have a policy environment that is...
Sorry to interrupt you here. Can you give some examples of where you're already doing that, or if you're not, your plan to do that?
So, can you, yeah. In fact, I was trying to summarize 10 years experience in 2 minutes, but In fact, we have already done that in 18 African countries. As we speak now, we have trained more than 100 PhDs and master's degree researchers who have generated more than 500 varieties of staple food in Africa. We have hundreds of seed companies across the continent, thousands of agro-dealers and farmer organizations. I think the point I'm driving at is we have done good stuff in the past 10 years. What is new now is we have a challenge to deliver this at scale, impact at scale. This is why we need partnership. And I think our partnership with ASET is where it makes a lot of sense, because key to that partnership is to have a shared understanding of challenges and opportunity. Analytics is crucial. And I think what Julius did was very important to tell us where are the opportunities, but also where are the challenges. Second step, we also need to make sure that we are fully aligned with government. We want to recognize and acknowledge and acclaim the leadership of African government who have committed themselves to deliver. And one of the tangible outcome of that is to allocate resources to agriculture and do it in an appropriate way. Thirdly, accepting that the private sector will drive the system. One of the things I was talking about, we have smallholder farmers in Africa. They are feeding us. They represent the majority of our people. But they are a group that is very hard to serve. They are undercapitalized and scattered all over the place. Therefore, doing business with smallholder farmers is very difficult unless you are able to innovate and find a way of aggregating physically and digitally. And this is why everything that was mentioned today around the digital revolution is going to be crucial in making sure that you can profile, we can understand the opportunities, and provide linkage to market. As we speak now, and I will let know that Ghana would be a very good example. We are very happy to be a partner to the Ministry of Agriculture to support the development of planting for food and job in specific region of Ghana. We are currently investing, setting up consortia of partners who will deliver end-to-end solution from seed to market solution so that we can take advantage of some of these opportunities. I think where I really want to your point about where are you partnering, we actually partnered with ASET to work on 4 major areas in 5 of our countries. One has to do with land tenure, because unless you have security of tenure, it's extremely difficult to have an incentive to invest and beneficiate the land. Second, the issue of agro-processing. The key word is adding value. I think as a famous leaders of African banks said, as we export raw material, we are exporting job. So the key is how do you make sure that you invest in SMEs who are able to take the produce of the farmer, process it, and feed into our market that is growing because we are importing a lot of food. Third area where we are partnering with ASET has to do with skill development and youth engagement. Fourth, market access. And as I speak, we had a chance to have a consultation with stakeholders in Ghana and came up with specific recommendation on each of these areas as to what needs to be done in order to advance the agenda of realizing the ag transformation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think it's quite exciting to see this partnership. Let me call on Nick now from the Tony Blair Institute. How do you come in and tell us a little bit about your institute and what role you play in all this ecosystem of agriculture?
Yes, thank you, Simeon, and thank you, colleagues. Let me start by saying thank you to ASET for hosting this event and for having us today, and congratulations to Julius and colleagues both on the report, but also to KY and Ed on having built the organisation that you have. Like with Agro, as Fidel was saying, we're also 10 years old this year, and so I recognise the journey that KY and Ed have been on to get to this point, and it's this event, I think, is real testament to what you've achieved, so congratulations. It's an excellent report. I very much agree with the way that Julius has set it out. We very much concur with this sort of twin track, if you like, in particular, for industrialization and agricultural transformation. Through history, all economies that have industrialized have started with agricultural transformation, so it is, to me, essential that that happens in Africa too, particularly in an age of automation that we're in. So very much agree with the starting point for the report. The role I particularly, or rather the point I particularly want to come back to myself, that builds on the points that Julius and Fidel have made themselves, and you asked the question right at the start, Simeon, we need to move from what to how. The point I want to focus on in particular is the role of government and the importance of government and leadership through government to really achieve agricultural transformation. I work for Tony Blair Institute. We're a global not-for-profit. We work in 30 countries across 4 continents. I specifically run the Africa team. We were previously the Africa Governance Initiative. When I say you're 10 years old, you may have known us by our previous name, the Africa Governance Initiative. We work specifically with leaders and governments in 14 countries now, similar to AGRA, specifically on the question of how do we help support leaders to define and implement their vision. KY said right at the start of the day, and I agree with him, that transformational leadership is a prerequisite for this sort of change. It's absolutely right, but it doesn't just happen. You need support for that leadership to be applied through a government system, and that's what we seek to do. As I say, we work with 14 countries and their leaders with the goal of working with them on their own priorities to support them to deliver them. But the number one priority that consistently comes out at the top is jobs, job creation. As the Honourable Minister said earlier, the ability to create those jobs over the next 20, 30 years is the difference between a demographic dividend and a national security issue, I think you said, and that's what brings us back to agriculture and the importance of agricultural transformation, which we work on in a number of countries, Liberia, Rwanda, soon Côte d'Ivoire, and others. I read the report again yesterday. This is where I'll come back to the role of government and the question you asked me. I read the report again yesterday on the plane when I was coming in, and I was reading through the recommendations as Julia set out earlier, and you agree with all of them, sound absolutely right. But with a government perspective, I come at this from a government perspective more than an expert in agriculture. That's a confession I should put on the table up front. I ended by thinking, wow, that's quite a list. That's a lot to do when you look at macroeconomic policy, reforms to the business environment, incentives for innovation in technological development, education, land tenure, right through to divorce law, as you ended on, to ensure that women have access to land. That is a big to-do list for any government, and this is just agriculture. This is a government that will be trying to do other things as well. And the point to that is really 2 things. One is if you're the Ministry of Agriculture faced with that list, you've got 2 questions. One is, where do you start? And the second is, how on earth do I, as the minister or the Ministry of Agriculture, do all of those things when I'm not responsible for most of those things? I, as the minister, can't control the macroeconomic policy. I can't control taxation policy. I can't control where the roads get built or where the energy lines get built. We worked I mentioned Liberia, and we worked with President Johnson Sirleaf and her team through the Ebola crisis. And as an aside, it's tremendous news to hear that she'll be leading the leadership panel for ASSET this morning. That's a really exciting development. She used a phrase during the Ebola crisis to development partners, donors, and the range of actors that were supporting the government through the crisis: you row and we steer. Obviously, that was particular to a crisis when there was an influx of resources, but I think that phrase works in the context of agricultural transformation as well, which is to say, of course, it requires the initiative, the efforts, the money, the action of a range of actors, private sectors, NGOs, foundations, etc., but critically, all within the framework of government leadership and a government strategy that people can get behind. And that, to me, is the big message that sits behind the purposeful collaboration that the Vice President talked about this morning. What does that look like when it works well? It starts with a vision. It starts with a government leadership being able to set out a vision for the role of agricultural transformation within the economic transformation of their country for the reasons that we've talked about. Critically, then, it's about applying a sector focus, a country working out for itself through both economic analysis and political analysis at the same time. What are the sectors that are really going to give us competitive advantage, where we can really develop the value chain? That focus is essential precisely because of the complexity of the issue and the complexity of the government system. So you can really understand, take the market system and therefore where to intervene to develop the value chain right along the way. So we work on rubber and palm oil through the Liberia Agricultural Transformation Agenda. We're planning to work on the cashew nut value chain with the government of Côte d'Ivoire, horticulture in Rwanda. This sector focus is critical, particularly to understand or to be able to apply a cross-government approach So you really are tapping into the levers right across the government system and understanding that markets are dynamic and therefore change, and therefore having a system, a government system that is simultaneously long-term but dynamic, able to flex. And therefore, this is the last point, and this is where we come in terms of the partnerships we work with, we build with governments, is building the cross-government coordination, collaboration, and decision-making. That sounds a very obvious thing, and it sounds a very bureaucratic thing. But I come back to the point that KY made this morning, that transformational leadership is the prerequisite. We seek to build those forms of cross-government coordination from the very center. Presidential Task Force for Agriculture flowed from the work in Ebola with Presidential Johnson Sirleaf, the Presidential Delivery Team in Sierra Leone, similarly. That's how you get all government ministers around the table and the application of political leadership such that you can have the range of interventions that are needed to really get to agricultural transformation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nick. Well, now, we don't have enough time left, but so a bit of pressure is on Vanessa, because we'd like to get questions from the audience as well. I think it will be beneficial for the panel to respond to questions. So I missed to introduce Vanessa earlier, and so Vanessa Adams is Vice President for AGRA, in charge of delivery, okay, inclusive transformational agriculture. One thing yesterday I talked with her that impressed me on her is that she speaks Bambara, which is the language that my wife speaks. And I thought that I knew the language, but she's more fluent than I am on that one. So, congratulations. So if you briefly give us the summary, we don't have enough time left, so that we can get an opportunity to hear the questions from the audience. The floor is yours.
Ini baraji. Antisika Bamanangafo. Sorry, wrong conversation. I just had to see if you're still there and not falling asleep. I want to recognize again everyone who has taken the time to come here. When I learned I was coming on Friday, I had no idea how wonderful and engaged and dynamic this group, everybody who is here and working hard and producing these dynamic summaries and position papers. My comments and remarks are really dedicated right now to the honorable ministers who are still here, taking your time to commit to thinking about transforming this continent economically and specifically with regard to agriculture. Personally, I arrived in Africa 16 years ago in the middle of Mali in a village, and I really had no idea. And I can tell you that most people around the world reading about Africa still have no idea. And I like to have an argument about what really matters, but we'll save that for lunch. For now, we've all heard about Malabo commitments to at least 10% of GDP investment in agriculture. 10% is being invested by a few countries. Many are on their way to exceeding that commitment. One of our commitments as AGRA is to track and support and monitor, encourage you to commit to that investment and invest it wisely. So what do you invest in? Improve systems, standards, rural finance, inputs, research and development. There is a long list, but the systems envelope, systems for improved agriculture, actually comprises many of those detailed agenda items. Improved technologies. Everybody knows that we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. We need to be market-driven. We need to be ahead of the curve. Why should Africa just catch up? Why don't we leapfrog, as happened with cell phone adoption, and do the same in agriculture? We can do precision farming in Africa. It doesn't just have to be Israel. Land and water reform. Everyone's talking about it. It's hard work. It doesn't really get harder than that, and it has to be done. Inclusive access for youth and women. I don't think we here in the room can appreciate and talk about this enough. We had a big breakfast. We know where we're sleeping tonight. we don't have to worry about how to get dressed or wear shoes to school. We have to make it easier. That's our jobs. Finally, if we don't measure it, it didn't happen. If we cannot find data and evidence to justify what we're doing, honorable ministers of finance should not invest. And yet, it's happening. A lot of hard work is happening. There's a lot of investment trying to come in, a lot of investors on the continent trying to grow their investments. We can make it easier for them, and we should. There are many things we all do every day which have to help us transform agriculture around the region. It takes energy, it takes creativity, it takes focus. And I encourage you all to join us in that. We'll be in September in Kigali at the African Green Revolution Forum, and I hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Vanita. Yeah. Well, we have reached the end of this panel. So I want to thank the panel really for an excellent presentation. First of all, of the ATR 2, and also we heard from two people from AGRA about how they are partnering, and as well as from the Tony Blair Institute on the coordination policy and so. I think for my take, the key issue is really how the different organizations can actually align themselves to work together to have a meaningful impact on the ground. Because in this world that we are doing, I have the impression that we work, over each other and with less coordination. And I think we need to really do a better job in this area. So whenever we can actually be together and coordinate, we should do that. And I think the ball in this case will be in the hands of the country, because they are the one to actually coordinate us. So we'll be listening to the different countries in ways by which they want the different partners to coordinate. So thank you very much, and let's keep that in mind going forward.
Thank you very much, dear participants. The 1 day and a half I have been here, I have met very many friends, I have made friends, and therefore you will allow me to skip the protocol and say, dear friends. I must confess that since I was appointed a Minister of State, this has been the most informative and educative conference I have attended. And therefore, thank you very much. Yesterday, we had the most important session discussing a topic that is dear to all of us, and a topic that represents the future of Africa as we reposition ourselves to be a powerhouse in food production. Let me start with the threat, and then I give you hope. I want all of us here to have a mental flight, go back to our villages, and see how and how many people are sleeping hungry, how many people are surviving on one meal a day. The threat. 738 people of the world population have no food. The majority of them are in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. The hope. In the next few years, the demand for food is hitting $15 trillion. And that food will come from Africa. Food for thought. Yesterday, we discussed very many important things, and we want you to take home the following. Investing in agriculture gives 11-fold returns, which is more than any other investment. It improves economic growth, creates jobs, drives opportunities, and the demand for few products and services. We all agreed yesterday that this is the way to go. What should be done? We must collect data, and therefore we have evidence drives in innovations and learning. What should be done? Inclusive agriculture. We must have the youth, we must have the women, we must have the farmers, we must have the scientists, we must have the traders, the exporters, the importers, the producers, and the processors. And finally, we are working for our consumers. We must have the commitment of all of us. We must be committed to feed the 738 people of the world population who are starving, to feed ourselves, and to create economic opportunities. That should be our commitment. We agreed yesterday, what should we do? What should be done? We must address the issues of land, the issues of water, and therefore, we must have reforms and good governance in our areas. We must create delivery mechanisms. That's what we agreed yesterday. We also agreed, what should we do? What should be done? Agriculture links health, nutrition, and therefore we must have food security, we must have food safety, we must have food nutrition. We must involve science and technology in the issues of agriculture. We must have crop protection post-harvest. Agriculture must be mechanized. We must do agro-processing. We must enhance agricultural education. Here we're talking about skilling the people, skilling the farmers, training, vocational schools, and the technical schools. How do we do it? How do we do it? I'm working against time. Agriculture processing, what we call value addition, we agreed yesterday. We must have strong farmer associations, effective communication and the use of the media. Sustainable Development Goals 17, and that's creating partnerships and networking. Market-oriented approach within the field of agriculture. How do we do it? Agriculture commodity logistics must be organized. How do we do it? Multi-sectoral collaboration and coordination. Finally, we must implement our policies. There must be implementation of our policies. If we can do that, we shall end up having a reversible transformation of agriculture as we grow our economies. That's what we agreed yesterday, and that's what you should take home. I thank you all. May God bless you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Chris Kibanzanga. Please put your hands together for him one more time. Segueing straight into the next session, we'll be hearing ministerial reports from the packed working sessions from yesterday. We're privileged to have to chair this session the senior advisor to the Minister of Finance for Ghana, previously chief economist at Asset, and incidentally, the leader of the team that prepared the report that Julius so eloquently presented from. Ladies and gentlemen, let's receive Yao Ansu to lead us into the next session. Please put your hands together.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I know that this session stands in the way of two more important events, your lunch and the arrival and the presentation of the heads of state session. So we'll be very quick. Unfortunately, we are running behind time. So this session, yesterday, you all worked very hard, and I was in one of those sessions. There was a lot of passionate discussion. And we covered, in addition to agriculture, extractives, light manufacturing, resource mobilization and management, and youth employment and skills. And you all agree with me that these are very key fundamental pillars of Africa's transformation. And as KY has already said, these pact are meant to, as platform of sharing and learning from each other going forward. So what we discussed here yesterday and today is just the beginning of what we hope will then propel us into drilling even down further into trying to come up with solutions to concrete issues. So with that said, I don't know who the panelists are. I know they are very important people because they are ministers, and if they will come up here. You know yourselves, please. Come on.
I represent the extractive chapter. Yesterday we had an extensive discussion on that, and therefore it's my privilege to present a summary of that. First, the Africa Center for Economic Transformation convened a group of almost 40 stakeholders with representation from 9 African countries as well as 4 other countries. The group includes the State Minister of Minerals, of Mine, Petroleum and Natural Gas of Ethiopia, other senior government officials, senior officials of international mining, oil and gas companies from the African countries, as well as representatives from the international and local private sector organizations, civic organization, academia, international organization, and the group met under the aegis of the Pan-African Coalition for Transformation chapter on extractive. The meeting included an overview of the background study on local content and value addition in the mineral, oil, and gas sector of the selected Africa countries, which underpin the chapter. An overall view of the pact chapter progress activity to date, as well as intervention from Africa country on key implementation issues under the key pillars of local content and value addition, local employment and skill development, procurement of local goods and services, local equity and participation by state and local private sectors, and local finance and value addition. There was also a vibrant discussion on how governments and major international mining and oil gas companies and development partners can work together to build local capacity to participate in sectors and in other areas of economy. The discussion highlights and affirms the importance of prioritizing more support for building local capacity to participate in sectors, anchoring local content and value addition in the national development strategy and plan, as well as exploring more innovative financing solutions to the financing constraint faced by the local companies. And of course, the points agreed are summarized below. 1, the chapter affirms the relevance and importance of peer review, peer learning of best practice approach. The chapter agreed that the Africa Mining Vision, adopted by the African states in 2009, is a overriding guiding vision and a strategic framework for the chapter overall agenda for transformation. Second, the chapter agreed that due to the different levels of stage of development of minerals and oil and gas industry and the need to address challenges collectively, the chapter could be clustered into 2 or 3 ages where the issue and solution are very similar and countries could learn from each other best practices. This would be an equivalent to a communities of practice with the chapter to interact more frequently other than once a year. The third, each country cluster would be the pair with a set of technical expertise put together and assigned by ASSET or Africa Mineral Development Center. The interaction between the clusters, country and experts team would be more frequent. There would also be cross-cluster exchange of expertise and discussion online through the social media to be promoted and managed by the assets. Fourth, periodically chapter cluster would review country level progress in implementing using agreed upon peer review indicators and measure of progress. The reporting would accumulate, which would then be culminated into the final report for the next chapter session of ATF. 6, it was also suggested that each cluster would hold workshop once a year before the ATF conference. This would depend on, of course, on funding. Then there will be online knowledge resources, an online magazine to be proposed for the chapter networking and exchange of knowledge and ideas whose role and function would be abbreviated as GHANA. The G stands for generating knowledge for the chapter. The H stands for harnessing the knowledge through changes. The A stands for accessing knowledge for transformation. The N stands for needing specialization. And the A, advocating and affirming implementation. The 7-point agree was regional value chain approach, and under the strategic issue side, the ACFT has a potential to open up regional market for supply chain in Africa, especially extractive supply chain. The chapter agreed that ACE, African Center for Economic Transformation, should seek funding to assess the potential for establishing regional supply chain for some critical mining and energy input using the opportunity for free movement of goods and services. This also implies that there would be a redefinition of the scope of local content with the extractive sector, local, national, regional, and continental. Lastly, or finally, participants also agreed that there was a need for a champion country to work with ASSET and other interested countries to better finance the future modalities of implementation and nature and scope of chapter objective and activities. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwan, for sticking within the time.
Good afternoon. My name is Nigel Gwyn Evans, and I'm an official in the South African Department of Trade and Industry, particularly responsible for industrialization across the region. So I'm very involved in SADC tripartite circles. So a great pleasure to be here, and a great thank you to ASSET for the incredible work. So I'm reporting back on the light manufacturing sector, although I must say there were some dissenting voices that it shouldn't just be on light, it should also be looking at heavy industry as well, which I think was quite hotly debated, but that certainly needs to be kept in mind. I think I'm reporting back on three key thrusts. The first is around getting the basics right, the second is around an export drive, and the third is around coherence and coordination. And I think many of the previous speakers have touched on many of these aspects. So firstly, in terms of getting the basics right, I think this is really around, I think, the big issues that we all know about. The key issues of primary infrastructure, logistics and transport, and the bureaucratic obstacles at border posts. We heard from Rwanda, for example, how they've been able to reduce the cost of containers from $4,000 down to $2,000 from Rwanda through to the coast. We looked at the impact of the fourth industrial revolution and the digital economy and the critical need for Africa to be expanding the skills. We know the fourth industrial revolution is going to have a huge impact on the globe, particularly in terms of Africa, and the more we can drive skills, appropriate skills development, the better. Then, finally on this point, the absolute lifeblood of manufacturing, of industry, is really energy. We discussed the challenges of intermittency, the challenges of weak supply, the cost that is being pushed down, and really this goes around governance and good governance and ensuring that adequate provision is focused on energy supply. So that's on getting the basics right. Secondly, mounting an export push. This is absolutely fundamental to manufacturing, expanding beyond growing the economies of scale that are required and being able to expand in the way that it should. We looked at many of the barriers. We need regional markets, all the issues that Dr. Songwe spoke about earlier. We need an SCFTA which cuts across our very complex border challenges, non-tariff barriers, etc., that our exporters in the region face. We need to be looking at regional value chains. Certainly that's a very significant part of what we're doing in SADC, and I'm sure in many of the other regional trading blocks. How do we strengthen and build appropriate regional value chains around some of our key commodities, some of our key sectors, and which cut across these boundaries. And certainly really looking at the backward integration into many of our resource-intensive sectors. How do we expand the input suppliers into our mining, agricultural, etc. resources, which has been spoken about earlier. Thirdly, around coherence and coordination. And I think this has been very eloquently spoken about, but the need for government to be engaging the private sector, that sounds very simple, but how do we do it? Certainly, some of the countries that's really starting to do fantastic work around this. We heard around the case of Rwanda, how they've also really focused on the ease of doing business, working closely with the private sector, and they've certainly come up the ranks to, I think they're now second in terms of the ease of doing business. We've heard about the coordinating agencies that Ethiopia has put in place, such as the Ethiopian Investment Commission, that coordinates all manufacturing and investment related activities. So these are areas that are required. I think also reflecting on the mega trends of the fourth industrial revolution, it brings a renewed complexity to our sectors, to the need for very specialized services that will go around our key sectors. But this needs the strengthening and upgrading of and upscaling of our trade and industry departments. It's no longer appropriate just to have general trade and industry departments and trade and industry specialists. How do we start to build and strengthen strong sectoral capabilities that can really tailor itself to whether it's agri-processing, clothing and textiles, our auto sector? We need specialists within government to be able to do this. And perhaps as an example, we had feedback from, and I'm not sure if she's here, the CEO of Naya Cosmetics, Nana Amayanka, but she is a small an emerging cosmetics producer, very innovative producer of mainly shea butter, cocoa butter, etc. And she produces over 70 cosmetic products. And I think to help focus the mind, she is struggling, certainly in Ghana, with many of the high cost factors that she has to deal with. She's dealing with the costs of obtaining certification, the lack of testing facilities, which affects the quality of input that she gets. She lacks proper, lacks proper packaging support, so she ends up importing most of her packaging from the US. And this really forces perhaps a much higher cost platform than she should be. This prevents her from achieving these economies of scale, her competitiveness that would allow her to grow to a much bigger business that's exporting regionally and in time, hopefully, internationally. And I think what should occupy the minds of us as policymakers and officials is how do we cut this red tape? We heard from the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry from Ghana around, I think he called it the guillotining team, the guillotining of red tape, and creating the conditions that would allow Nana to really expand and become the next big producer of cosmetics or whatever sector she's in. And I think this comes to this point around coherence and focus. It needs leaders to be absolutely committed to harnessing resources, to building capacity in government, to dealing with industry and resolving the requirements of companies like Nana's. And this is what will allow the manufacturing sector to expand. I think ASSET has provided an incredible platform for dialogue and for sharing of best practice examples from across the region. We had many, many of them over the last 2 days, and it's been incredibly useful. So I think this should continue. We must continue to dig out these examples and go much deeper. What Ethiopia has done in terms of expanding its manufacturing sector in a very short time, growing its economy at 10% a year, how have they done it? What are the mechanisms that they have put in place to do this? This is what ASSET can help to dig out. The peer review mechanism that's been put in place, this needs to be continued and expanded. And we need to really understand the policy lessons that emerge. So I think, Chair, we had an incredible discussion. It's been very difficult to pull all of this together, but I think we will continue to expand and deliver on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I like the way you crystallize all into a 3 big buckets. If there's time, which I doubt whether there will be, I'll come back again to each one of you to see what's the most important thing that you would like to see done. If we were to meet here again next year, that we say, okay, we went in Accra and been done. So prioritize some of your recommendations. So, Minister from Rwanda, welcome back to Ghana.
Thank you very much. My name is Uzenda Gijimana. I'm the Minister of Finance of Rwanda, and I represent the chapter on resource mobilization and management. Our group is composed of the representatives from Ghana, Uganda, Benin, Guinea, Senegal, Tunisia, Egypt, Burkina Faso, Uganda, Morocco, and Rwanda. Our conversation yesterday was based on the current international finance landscape and the resources needed to implement the Africa Agenda 2063 and the UN Agenda 2030. In view of this context, our chapter meeting agreed that there is a need for more resource mobilization from different sources, external, domestic, public, and private. The areas where African policy objectives and systems are at various stages of evolution that were discussed yesterday include: 1, development finance strategies. Here we discussed about how to map development finance for medium-term transformation objectives across sectors and various levels of government. We also discussed on investment implementation. Here the focus was on the necessity to generate bankable project pipelines and have effective monitoring and evaluation systems. And this requires systematic treatment with high level of political engagement. 3, we discussed regional connectivity. Here we highlighted the need for connecting infrastructure across regions to capture market growth and generate investment opportunities. 4, we discussed the private sector finance. Here, focusing on financial sector development, using new technologies for leapfrogging on financial inclusion, including savings vehicles and financial transaction systems, small, medium enterprises, and startup financing. Number 5, we also explored the possibilities of blended financing. Here we agreed that to explore opportunities of using ODA and public resources, domestic mainly, to leverage private finance. We also discussed strategies to increase domestic revenues in a medium-term framework. Lastly, the group also discussed the problem of illicit flows and agreed that we need a strong mechanism to tackle illicit flows which rob African countries of major financial resources. We had also in the afternoon specific discussions on domestic source mobilization. Our discussion on this topic can be categorized in 4 aspects. 1 is about country strategies for domestic source mobilization and developing the financial sector. 2, the successes in different countries represented, the challenges, the solutions, and the lessons learned from various countries. Concerning the country domestic source mobilization strategies, we focus on how best to channel resources to where governments can get more revenues, improving the resource allocation and utilization to provide public goods to citizens as a way to motivate taxpayers, to review the legal framework as part of tax reforms, to introduce ICT in our tax systems to ensure transparency, efficiency, and traceability. Lastly, to ensure that the quest to increase domestic revenues does not unduly burden the taxpayer by improving efficiency and effectiveness of tax administration and by widening the tax base. We also identified some challenges in various countries, which I can summarize as follows. One, inability to effectively capture the informal sector into the tax net. Two, difficulty in communication with the taxpayers without visible evidence of the benefits they derive from their taxes, like infrastructure, services, education, health, etc. Three, the problem of tackling the issues of tax incentives, exemptions, and rationalization of subsidies. Four, effectively leveraging technology in tax administration in a context of low internet penetration. Five, tackling the issues of tax evasion, illicit financial flows, and corruption. Six, effectively taxing land and real estate. Here is mainly the issue of lack of database on properties. Seven, ensuring consistency in tax systems from the national level to sub-national levels, municipalities mainly. Lastly, there's the issue of capacity of our tax administration, especially at the local level, at decentralized entities level. We shared some experiences from various countries, which I can also summarize. On prerequisites for effective resource mobilization, the countries emphasized need for political will and the need to simplify the tax systems and to harmonize tax systems to boost compliance and to build effective database. On communication on tax issues with taxpayers, the meeting agreed that there is no better way to boost the social contract between the tax administration and taxpayers than providing evidence of public goods provided using revenues. On managing tax exemptions, the meeting noted that it is important to conduct a diagnostic study to analyze value for money for existing tax exemptions, and also it's important to have laws to set the ground for granting tax exemptions to minimize abuses. Maybe I can go quickly to the action plan that the group came out with. Members agreed as a way forward to prepare medium-term revenue strategies to bolster domestic resource mobilization. We agreed also to review technology potential and how quickly it can be made an integral part of the medium-term revenue strategy. We agreed also to review incentives to encourage the mobilization of private savings to enhance financial intermediation. We focus on small and medium enterprises that create jobs. We agreed also to analyze the efficiency of public expenditures and the visibility in the use of public resources to bolster the social contract between taxpayers and governments. We also agreed to establish communication channels of our chapter to keep the dialogue going between the pact RMM countries in this chapter. We agreed that we could continue sharing our experiences and ideas through video conferences, but also ASET will come up with a portal to facilitate sharing of information within our chapter. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very disciplined, right on time. I think you have a challenge now. Everybody has been on time, so.
I will be doing my discussion on 3 fronts. Why? How do you manage it? And what is the role of the chapters, the YES Youth Employment Skill? My name is Adama Jimba Job. I'm the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education from the Gambia. Why are we talking about youth employment and skills? According to the United Nations, Sub-Saharan Africa has the world's youngest population, more than 3/5 of its population in 2015 under the age of 25. The region's working age population is estimated to rise from 522 million in 2015 to 600 million in 2030. In most African countries, over 80% of workers are in the informal sector. The face of unemployment or youth informal sector is changing to become that of the secondary or tertiary school graduates. The lack of any continuum between education and training as a major cause of exclusion among youths. Those who leave the school system because of academic failure and without attaining the required level of performance are left out of the system without any opportunity for training required for employment. This exclusion of young people poses a threat to the socio-political stability of any country. The numbers graduating from secondary level in Africa have been rising due to access. That is, we have made some progress. But in the pace of expansion in job demand in Africa's formal sector have not matched the pace of graduation from secondary and tertiary institutions. The relevance of education to foster resilient, prosperous, sustainable, and peaceful societies in Africa in an interconnected global world focusing on building an adequate skill set of young people and adults for work and life and living together. Towards knowledge-based societies through the advancement of higher education, science, technology, and innovation in Africa with special focus on research and STEM. The informal or the formal sector jobs cannot be met by the secondary and tertiary graduates due to skill gaps. The rapid evolution of robotics, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things, the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, is fundamentally changing the nature of jobs. Therefore, financing education should be a way of trying to address it. We said meeting domestic and international commitments, focusing on increasing innovative investment in education as well as the efficiency of education financing. Monitoring and mentoring, strengthening information system for evidence-based and accountable education policies and strategies. And in order to do that, what should Africa do? The youth employment skills, yes, chapters should focus on the levers through which youth employment can be reduced by enhancing skills development to help meet the supply side and future job needs of young people. And how do we go about that then? What are the jobs likely to be available or African countries should target in the future in the light of the Fourth Industrial Revolution? African countries should target and adopt these new jobs, opportunities, and targets. They should own them rather than being using them. That is, we should be producers and not consumers. Given the Fourth Industrial Revolution, changes should be made to secondary and technical education and training systems to take advantage of the productive opportunities, including the informal sector and agriculture. Curriculum reform or disruption should be key to TVET and digital technology in Africa. An exponential increase to budgetary allocation for TVET should be beneficial. Partnership and coordination is critical to skills on the upgrading entrepreneurship and an imminent digital revolution. This situation can be tackled not only by bridging or building bridges between the different types of training and education in formal, non-formal, and formal sectors, but also by having a paradigm shift from TVET to TVSD. Now, what is the role of the YES chapter? The focus areas should include, but not in any particular order, comprehensive database on labor, skill gaps, entrepreneurship, and future job projections. Identify a champion country to drive the YES agenda. Peer-to-peer learning and what works, but tailored to each country's vision. YES chapters to facilitate interaction between policymakers, academia, and the private sector. There should be a deliberate policy action for African countries spearheaded by the YES chapter. For example, the like the Mobutu Declaration, to increase budgetary allocation to TVET institutions across sub-Saharan Africa. Innovative education should be fundamental. Shift in mindsets in the entire ecosystem about TVET, the teachers, the policymakers, the private sector. Yes, chapters should be seen as facilitators. Yes, chapters should facilitate interaction between policymakers, academia, development partners, and the private sector. And to conclude, Mr. Chairman, I want us to understand the problem of youth and youth employment and skill is a problem beyond any sector in any country and should be seen as a problem for all and sundry, and therefore should be embraced as a problem that we all should work together to solve, but not allowed or be left in the hands of a single sector or any group of people. Therefore, I would want to end up with a quote from my language saying, "What crawls moves into the bush." So before we allow it to spread, let's nip it at the bud. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the floor? Or contributions, suggestions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I need to direct to the minister from Rwanda. And I think I like the point you guys raised about domestic mobilization of resources. I'm not quite sure the group went further and looked like the pension funds within the country. Is that a way you looked in terms of domestic mobilization? I could see where you are headed to, even doing IPO, initial public offer. What about those pensions within the country? Is that something you considered as a group?
When dealing with issues around young people, the process is just as important as the outcome. Young people need to feel and actually be part of the processes that arrive at the decisions that affect them. So my suggestion is, as we work on strengthening that new, or will that be the fifth pact or so, can we ensure that in all of the countries that participate, we work with the youth associations, we work with the national youth umbrella youth groups, we work with youth stakeholders, especially from civil society, because it always brings in some insight that you might not be able to get working from these kinds of environment. Let's go to the field, let's get more young people represented, especially as you set up either a secretariat or a committee or any of those processes. So then we can be felt, we can be deemed to be actually fulfilling the mandate of youth inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yesterday in our session, the youth employment session, there was a problem with the brain drain, that and I didn't feel it addressed today. And it's a real problem. As a professor, most of our students that we train at the university, most of our graduates, they go to the States, they go to Europe, they go everywhere. Most of them don't stay in Africa because we don't use them or we don't have enough money to employ them. What is the chapter? I mean, I thought one of the problems we need to address is how do we keep those brains in Africa?
About whether the group on resource mobilization management expanded the scope of discussion to include also other sources of domestic financing, like using the capital market and other financial instruments available within the country. Yes, we spent more time on analyzing the external finance. Then we went to domestic resource mobilization, the taxation system, but also we discussed the need to develop the financial sector, including capital market, which also is a source of finance, of long-term financing. We even discussed different ways of promoting long-term savings within the country to have enough resources for long-term investment. Maybe I can contribute to the
Go ahead.
second question as well.
Go ahead.
The brain drain is an issue, is an old problem on the continent. We need to find a way to retain the people we train. We need to retain our human capital. So we need to review our employment conditions, but also to open opportunities for employment, for social security, and other benefits that can attract our cadres. Thank you.
We want to say that it is a very complex issue with a multifaceted problems. I mean, it's not only economy. Some people move out of Africa not because of the pay or the what they take home, it's just because of personal reasons. So I think I would concur with the Honorable Minister that we need to make the working environment more favorable, but still we need to sensitize our African people to understand that Africa needs them. And the only way we can develop this continent is for us to stay in the continent. But definitely it's a problem that is more complex than many of us think. Thank you.
Okay, as I said at the beginning, we are standing between two important things. We started late and we've been cut short. So I don't think I'm going to take any more questions. But I would like, before we end, for each one of the panel members, if there's one thing that you think, that you discussed, that you thought that the chapter going forward should really focus on and really drill down and come up with something very concrete to governments or to countries to work on, what would it be? I'll start with Minister from Ethiopia. Very quickly, one each.
Thank you very much. First of all, the extractive chapter has discussed several issues, but I think one of the issues that I would like to emphasize here is that there are many problems in the extractive industry. And then, of course, to find out what to do and to curve a course of action, each country will have to need to assess what it has and what it doesn't have. And then after that, each country will have to have a strategic plan of action and policy framework. This is very important for each country to go forward and to go forward with the mineral, exploiting the mineral and so on. The other issue that we discussed that I want to emphasize is about the financing. One of the bottleneck of in the extractive issue, especially when we bring the local content and value addition, is finance.
Okay, let's just end it. Financing to help the locals to get into the, right?
Yes, I just want to emphasize that we need to have a new innovative way of financing.
The local.
The traditional way have failed, and then we need to have an innovative way.
Okay, thank you. Industry.
That's one thing. So I think that's a big challenge given the complexity of the manufacturing sector. And I'm not sure if my team or the chapter would agree with this, but my personal view is that it needs a dedicated strengthening of the capacity of government official agencies, particularly around key sectors of your particular economy. So if we don't have that, you can't build relationships with industry, you can't get the laser-sharp focus that one requires on a particular industry.
Okay.
So building sectoral capacity in government and agencies.
And
Thank you.
how do you expect the chapter, how the chapter work on that? Because I said, what would the chapter do to help governments? No? Okay.
Many things.
All right. All right, thanks.
Thank you, moderator. In In one sentence, we had a good conversation here, but what's most important is what we will do after this meeting when we go back. Our chapter has agreed on an action plan. Let's implement it. Thank you.
Okay, so they have an action plan, and it's up to us and others to get it done. Youth employment.
Yeah, I think for me, the issue is the mindset. We need to have a shift, a paradigm shift in our mindset, so that we can accept what Tibet or whatever you call it can help or do in pushing Africa's development.
And how can the chapter work towards that?
Through sensitization, networking, collaborating, and working with the various stakeholders, particularly, as the gentleman said, the young people.
Okay.
They should be part of the process so that at the end of the day, they will make it their own.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Join me in giving a hand to the panel. I'm sure, given the time, we could have drawn down and engaged in a much deeper conversation, but I think we already have enough to work with for ASET to take and run with it for the chapter. And we look forward to the next event where we actually see some advancement in the action plans and the things agreed here. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Yao and Sue, for keeping it both comprehensive and proportional. Please give them another round of applause. And we do apologize if it appears we are hurrying you, because the session after lunch is incredibly precise by way of timing. And because of that, please observe the following important announcements. Lunch is from now till 2 o'clock. In fact, you should leave the lunch set 5 minutes to 2, because we have to be sat here by 2 o'clock. The doors will be shut at 2 o'clock. So please, you have an hour to do lunch, which should be enough. The announcement is that make sure you have your ID with you, otherwise you will not be allowed in. In terms of where to have lunch, if you were here yesterday, it's the same place. If you weren't, we will assist you. In front of the restaurant, you'll be giving your lunch coupons, and we hope you enjoy lunch. We look forward to seeing you at 2 o'clock, because the doors will be shut at that time. So please make sure you're back by 2 with your ID. Enjoy lunch. See you for the conversation between heads of state and private sector CEOs. Good afternoon. Your badge, sorry, your badges, forgive me. Your badges, not your ID. This one, your badge, not your ID, forgive me.